We're going to turn our attention to Italy. Really, one of the only major Italian movements we'll look at in the 20th century is futurism, which began around 1909 and was the brainchild of the man you see on your right, Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, who was quite a dandy dresser. Most of the modern movements we've looked at so far have attempted to be revolutionary insofar as the art world is concerned, to upend centuries of painting and sculptural traditions and try to make a modern art for the modern world. With futurism, we go a step further because while they are challenging artistic conventions like the rest, and certainly have some connections to other art movements, in particular Cubism, but also Orphism. And while that's certainly true, the other thing about futurism that sets them apart from everyone else is that they were actually revolutionary insofar as politics were concerned. They felt that there was a direct connection between their artistic work and the political sphere. Now, we can argue that Expressionism had an attempt to sort of try to present society with a way forward to a new utopia, and that is in fact very political in outlook, but the futurists were more directly political, as we'll see. The group was led by this poet, Marinetti, and he wrote a manifesto for futurism. And he had it published on the front page of Le Figaro. Now, Figaro looks like it's an Italian word, but in fact, this was a French daily newspaper. This was published in February of 1909. The Futurist Manifesto, and in the newspaper, the photo of the cover of the newspaper on the left, it's outlined in blue pencil, where you can see the futurism in the far left column. This is the Futurist Manifesto. And it's a great read if you ever have the time. You can find it very easily online. Because Marinetti was a poet, and it's really a beautifully written piece of literature. And it starts off with a little story, a narrative recounting a mad night of frenzy when they founded the group that Marinetti and his painter chums were staying up too late, drinking too much. And it starts off with the line, we were up all night, my friends and I. And they talk about their adventures after having this party. And in it, he likens their souls to an electric light lit from within. And this is an important metaphor for them because modern progress is, for the futurists, a great benefit. It's going to change society in a fantastic way. And as they're all lit up, like lights from within and lit up in other ways, they decided to go out. Always a good idea, right? But they decided to go out driving brand new sports cars late at night in this semi-frenzied state. And he says he was laying beneath the steering wheel, which was a guillotine knife that threatened my stomach. All of his writings are full of danger, sharp edges, things that are honed by machines. He goes on saying, death ran before us at each corner, offering me his hand nicely. Careening around corners, he talks about, crushing watchdogs beneath our burning wheels like shirt collars under the iron. All anger, danger, menace, violence. These are hallmarks of futurism. As they're out driving, he veers to miss two bicyclists in front of him or in his way. He says, I stopped short and in disgust hurled myself, Vlan, just an onomatopoeic word, VLAN, Vlan, head over heels into a ditch, half full of muddy water, a factory gutter. And then he talks about like sucking up the factory gutter mud and nursing on it and having it sort of feed his soul. Again, this is a hallmark of what futurism is all about. They love new machines and see man as becoming one with the machine, almost robotic in its way, leading to a glorious future where traditions are left behind. The manifesto then goes on to make 11 statements. I've highlighted some stuff in yellow here from the 11 statements. I want to sing the love of danger, the habit of energy and rashness. Again, their works, we'll see, are all full of energetic danger. We want to exalt the movements of aggression, feverish sleeplessness, the double march, the perilous leap, the slap with the blow in the fist. There's a lot of violence in futurism, sort of violent kinds of works. We declare that the splendor of the world has been enriched by a new beauty, the beauty of speed. And what we'll see as we look at futurist works is a sense of motion, a sort of tumultuous motion, forms seeming to careen across the canvas at breakneck speed. Down at number 7, poetry must be a violent assault on the forces of the unknown. Number 8, what is the use of looking back? Again, futurism is looking forward, and for them, forward was industrial progress and a wiping clean of the slate of anything that happened before. Number 9, we want to glorify war. We have already created an eternal, omnipresent speed. Glorify war, the only cure for the world. He goes on to sort of talk about horrible things, contempt for women. They're very anti-Semitic. They're anti-non-white Italians. But they did make some great art. Demolish museums and libraries, right? They're going to wipe the slate clean. Sing of great crowds agitated by work, the nocturnal vibration of the arsenals. Railway stations, factories, bridges, steamships, locomotives, airplanes. They love the modern world. That's what futurism is really all about. All of that said, it's important to remember that they were fascists. They were members of the fascist party. Marinetti was friends with Benito Mussolini. And when the manifesto says war is the true hygiene of the world, he thinks it's going to be cleansed of those things that Mussolini and later Hitler wanted cleansed. Africans, gypsies, homosexuals. These would be cleansed by war itself. So Marinetti was part of the fascist party, a party that believed in class difference based on birth and birthright, that certain people were born to be rulers of other people. And this is a horrible ideology, but one in which Marinetti had steeped himself. And so too did the futurists. This underscores their revolutionary desires to change society into something better, which to them looked every bit as utopian as all the other wonderful things we've been talking about. But the futurists as a group, a bunch of jerks, but on a certain level, the art is pretty fantastic. So let's go back and look at our picture from Boccioni. He wrote the Futurist Manifesto for painting and was one of the leaders of the Futurist movement. The City Rises up at MoMA is an image of an industrial work site with horses engaged with moving the dirt away. We see a man in the lower left corner with a wheelbarrow, and we see the horses in the center with their harnesses on to help move the dirt out of the construction pit, and you can see that the horses have run amok. They've run wild. We can read 4 or 5 of them moving around, and you can see that the men are being swept aside as they try to hold back the forces of these animals, dynamically charging in every possible direction. They're sweeping aside everything the horses are, really as a metaphor for the energy of modern construction. Up above at street level, we see more symbols of the modern world: street lights, large buildings, an electric trolley car moving through, more horses there behind it, and the title of the painting coming from what we're looking at, which is a city rising. A city being built under construction with modern materials and modern methods. At the same time, I think Boccioni understands its double entendre, the fact that it can mean 2 things. The city rises can also be seen as a metaphor for uprising. Change the city physically by sweeping aside the old in order to build the new. Now, this is very political in the futurist mind, but they also have an eye on conquering the art world. And so, as we saw, the manifesto for for futurism was published in Paris, and the futurists decide to mount their first group show also in Paris. So they all leave Milan, where they started, in 1911 to come to Paris to prepare for a big group show in 1912. You might start to put some pieces together here and think Paris 1911, what's going on in Paris in 1911, 1912? Well, certainly there's Cubism, but there's also the offshoot group of the Golden Section group, the Orphists, if you will. And they too were very much interested in action and the power of the machine. And in fact, the futurists may well have helped feed some of the ideas worked on by the Orphists. But they couldn't be more different when it comes to their outlooks and what they hope to achieve with their art. Futurism is all about revolution, about destroying the past to create a new future. And remember that Orpheus, after whom the Orphists were named, he tamed the wild beasts with his music. It's all about harmony and peace. This is the exact opposite, I think, of what the futurists are interested in. Another Boccioni, even though I hate his politics and whatnot, I think the pictures are fantastic. In this case, a soccer player, dynamically rendered, moving in space, capturing certain parts of it as it leaves sort of a blur behind as it moves. Very difficult to read at first, but then you start to think about how soccer players move around the ball, jumping in the air, sometimes flipping over backwards. And you can begin to sort of make out what might have been some of the inspiration for it with their shorts trailing in the wind behind them as they move fast across the field. Part of what influenced the futurists was what was called chronophotography. This was the idea of setting up the camera to take multiple exposures on a single frame that was pioneered by Etienne Jules Marey at the end of the 19th century and became more widely known in the early 20th century. Boccioni is in love with these kinds of pictures and is trying to really just, if you imagine either of these two photographs and then stacking the human figure back on itself again and again and again, you might come up with something like the dynamism of a soccer player. And what Boccioni is trying to capture is not the soccer player himself, but the lines of dynamic motion, the spirit of that action, rather than an illustration of a human at work. Boccioni was also a sculptor, and again, we have a dynamic movement, this figure striding muscularly forward. And the forms looking very much like the forms from the soccer player, painting as if they're blurred in a long exposure photo. Imagine comic books when Superman takes off and you see the red of his cape trailing behind him in the air. That sort of idea is here as well as the figure moves forward in space. You look back at his trailing foot or his trailing leg and you can see these sort of flame-like tracers of where he had been as he moves his way forward. This might help us to understand the soccer player painting a little bit better. At the same time, there's something about this figure that is almost like a machine man, as if he's part man, part airplane, part man, part automobile. The sense that he is a speeding machine moving forward. In the 1960s, there was an artist who was doing Iron Man comics, and just who was obviously in love with the futurists. I didn't know that until I started looking at the futurists. When I was reading Iron Man comics, I had no idea, but Gene Colan was looking back at these, and there was a while there in the 60s that Iron Man's costume sort of picked up on a sort of Boccioni kind of look. And all of it is about this mechanization of mankind, that if we adopt machinery for what it can do for us, which in this case is to make us into superhumans. We can move forward into the modern world. It's in bronze, and bronze can be treated any number of ways after it comes out of the cast. And one of the things, I'm sorry, this is slightly blurry. One of the things that bronze can do is to take on the appearance of machinery, because in Baccione's hands, he treats the surface with a steel brush to give you a series of striations. I think the next slide is slightly better, where you can see those striations across and make it look like machine parts, like engine parts, or even like fenders on an old automobile. Uh, Indeed, that's an important metaphor, because the Futurist Manifesto talks about the fact that uh, how much they praise the roaring automobile, which appears to run like a machine gun. And they even go on and say that the roaring automobile, that automobile metaphor, it's almost like our figure has a hood ornament on his nose. But this idea of the modern automobile is picked up in this quote from Marinetti. A roaring automobile is more beautiful, he says, than the Nike of Samothrace. Well, here's the Nike of Samothrace, a famous Hellenistic Greek work in the Louvre in Paris. And you can see that his figure is, in fact, borrows the basic pose of the Nike of Samothrace. It's almost as if Baccioni is taking Marinetti's words to heart and showing us the way in which a roaring automobile can be likened to the Nike of Samothrace. Giacomo Balla was another early member of the Futurist group, and you can see here again many of the same sort of machine-like forms, although it's not human at all, but rather these sort of polished, sharp-edged dynamos of form that appear as if they were derived from modern machinery. When we see it from the side, you can see the degree to which it's dangerous, sharp, it's dynamic. It seems to jut out into our space, threatening us with its very form, as if asking you to touch that polished surface, but then saying, aha, but it's a knife blade edge. That becomes a sort of horrifying menace. He did a number of paintings with very much the same forms, and I think you can see here as you look at these side by side that we have some of the same forms appearing in paint and in sculpture with the, I'll see if I can do this with the pen or not. Let's try this pen. Right, so this, I guess not. Excuse me. But you can see the form here, maybe the mouse will do it, right? This form here at the bottom, mirroring this form here, this form at the top, mirroring this form here. He did a series of paintings on this, and then through the series it becomes clear that the abstract speed plus sound is in fact the speed and sound of a roaring automobile as it races by. And once you start to think about an automobile coming around the curve of a racetrack and you're a spectator on the side, you can begin to see how that might play out. We see the sort of long swooping fenders of early automobiles, and then the idea of translating sound into physical form. The Orphist had done this too, but again with very different, with a very, very different agenda. Another of our futurists is Gino Severini. Here in Paris, he gives us an image of a dancer performing at Pigalle. Pigalle is a cabaret on the Moulin Rouge in Paris. Remember that the futurists, though they're Italian, had all gone to Paris 1911, 1912 to get ready for this big group exhibition. And again, it's a focus on action. The action of the dancer takes up the center part, where you can see the edges of her dress, her leg kicking up, her back leg supporting her, her body in the middle, dark hair at the top, face looking out toward us. And surrounding her are the waves of action sort of moving outward like waves in a pond where you've dropped a stone. And on the periphery, we begin to get these images of people at tables who are watching this performance. Again, if we think about Baccioni, how he handled the motion of the human figure through space, you see that moving through space makes the figure part of space. It leaves part of itself behind. The distinction between the form, uh, the physical form, and the non-physical space around it is blurred. It's coming out of Cubism, but treated in a totally different way. And so Severini's dancer, if we look at the leg kicking up, for example, compare it to the thigh and the leading leg on Baccioni, we can see that same sort of interplay between the figure moving in space and the space around it. Now, there's obviously a lot of overlap with Cubism in these works because, again, they've arrived there right as Picasso and Braque are moving from analytic Cubism into synthetic Cubism. And so the idea of fracturing the space, of blurring the distinction between the positive and the negative space, between the foreground and the background, these interplays of different elements of the composition are all coming out of Cubism eventually. Another interesting thing is that also from Cubism they get this idea of trying to reassert the flatness of the surface, where Braque had used stencils right over the top of the paint. One of the things that Severini does is to use these sequins to evoke the idea of her dress, gluing a series of gold sequins directly onto the surface. And again, that is very similar to a Cubist outlook, especially one leaning towards synthetic Cubism, where objects are collaged together to evoke an experience. That's certainly here as well. But also the idea that once you put something on the surface of the painting, then any kind of depth you create with the paint itself is negated because the viewer becomes immediately aware that you're looking at something flat. Carlo Carra, also one of the founding members of the Futurist movement, paints this somewhat later. In fact, you'll notice the date, a very monumental date in history, 1914. That's the year that World War I broke out after the murder of the assassination of the Count. And this was actually painted 3 days after that happened, in late June. And Carra said he was inspired by a number of leaflets that had been dropped from airplanes over Milan, sort of propagandistic leaflets being dropped over the city of Milan. And he takes that idea of being littered with snippets of text, and he rearranges a series of other texts, and he intends these to be a call for Italy to enter the war. At this point, they had not. And this is important for the futurists because all of them believed very strongly in war. As we read before, war is the only true hygiene of the world. They really thought that war was the eventual use of the machine. They didn't see anything negative in it. They felt that it would simply purge the world of the undesirable elements. Now, it's obviously, again, influenced by Cubism, in particular synthetic Cubist collages, where Braque, for example, gives us wood-grained paper to evoke the idea of the wooden guitar. Other pieces of paper to, again, sort of relate to the idea of the libretto, the sheet music used by the guitarist. But for Carra, even though it's more confusing, he wants it to be legible. He wants it to be literary. He wants you to see words in their totality. See sports, for example, very strongly written there. Music, La Rosa, Strada. At the same time, some of the words which are cut up and pasted down sort of like a ransom note, and some of them are actually painted on the surface. Some of them are actually just onomatopoeias. They're words that are meant to evoke sound. Here's a close-up, for example, siren sound. So we see H-U, H-U, hoo, which is the sound of a siren, and handwritten between the letters sirene, the Italian word for siren, running like a measuring tape across the center. We have references to aviatore, aviators, people who fly, right? We have words that suggest people screaming, evviva, evviva, engine screeches, machine guns, that T-R-A-A-K, track, is meant to be the sound of a machine gun. Notice also some of the words are just nonsense, right? We have other things, città moderne, the modern city, orchestra working together, but also obviously music. And then upside down on the left-hand side, next to the musical notation, zang tum tum, which we'll see more of in just a second. Just absolute utter nonsense. Again, evoking sound. Uh, Connections to the orifice are strong, aren't they? The orifice were really trying to paint sound as well, but less literally. They saw sound as color. They saw sound as harmony. And the futurists see sound as invasive, as interruptive, and also literal, as something that we read and thus hear from reading. Another Kara in the National Gallery, another of these collage-based works, where again he's putting down words in a way that sort of begins to suggest other ideas. The upper half is a tribute to a French aviator named Louis Blériot, who had flown across the English Channel in 1909. This, for the Futurists, was an amazing event. They loved the machine, and the idea that we could now cross the English Channel by airplane was for them absolutely fantastic. And so, at the top, right, we have these words arranged as if looking like an airplane, and you'll notice it says animale metallizzi, melatizzato, a metal animal. Certainly the idea that these are anamorphic forms. And the interesting thing is at the bottom we have words that seem to poetically refer to an adulterous affair. And you can see even in the pasted square in the lower right corner, adultera, adulterous, and sounds there through the words that are meant to be sounds evoking a couple having sex. He's again equating a very human behavior with the machine, the airplane as a metaphor, in this case for sex. Finally, Marinetti published various poems of nonsense that he called words at liberty. That's what parole in libertà means, words at liberty. And he talked about the fact that the futurists, as they're wiping away tradition to create a new artistic world, should try to destroy syntax. In other words, they should not use words based on the old rules of, subject-verb agreement, subject-verb, direct object, right? None of that matters. The words were being separated from any kind of syntax with the idea that each of the words would take on their own meaning. And what Zang Tum Tum is an account, poetically, of Marinetti's experience covering the Balkan War in Turkey in 1912. And thus it was written in Adrianopoli in October of 1912. And it says tum tum tum, zang tum tum, parole in libertà. What he said was that zang tum tum was for him the mechanical sounds of war, right? And that the poems inside are liberated from any kind of syntax and meant to evoke the experience of war through these kinds of interruptive, dangerous, mechanical sounds. And you'll notice that not only does, well, you can't read Italian, I assume, but nonetheless, the words are separated from syntax, but you'll also notice that they're separated from your normal layout of a printed page. The futurists are a major group in moving towards sort of modern ideas of book layout, right? And sometimes, for example, they're even laid out like Kara had done to evoke certain ideas. In this case, the balloon, what do you want to call it? Observatory balloon, not a zeppelin, but smaller, picked up on the left-hand side of the page. And again, the sounds interrupting everything, and the syntax simply broken up. So again, the futurists present to us something that is similar in many ways to a great number of different movements that we've already looked at, particularly movements in France, such as the Orphists and the Cubists. But their agenda and their aspirations are drastically different, significantly more political and significantly more revolutionary in the social world.